Total. Isso. Boa tarde a todos. Bem-vindos à parte da tarde do seminário. Meu nome é Lucimara.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. I am here. I would like to apologize because one of the panelists could not make this afternoon. Prosecutor Frederico is not here, so we will go on with the panel. Let me introduce our panelists. Joana Varon, she's Executive Director and affiliate of Beck Center of Internet Society at Harvard University. Laura, who is a PhD by Berlin University, and she's got a master's degree by the UNB, adjunct professor of civil rights, University of Brasilia, and director of IDP. And Nelson Novaes Neto, he's an engineer, and he has acted in internet providers for WOW, worked for Itaú Bank, and nowadays he's CSO and CTO of C6 Banks. So, Joana, you have the floor, please. Thank you, Lucimara. Good afternoon to all of you. I am Executive Director for Coding Rights, which is an organization of the civil society which exposes asymmetries. We work with the technology development based on human rights, also with the capacitation, workshops, digital security. We work widely with the storytelling about technologies and advocacy strategies and partnerships with other organizations from the civil society. My main focus will be privacy, if there is security and protection of privacy. As to leakage background in the world, the chart starts back from 2013, and now we are going to 2017, where we see a enlargement of database leakage. Leakage of citizens, data leakage, Equifax, Firebase. Once we have a digital world, we have more data available in the network and more security incidents. PayPal, not PayPal suffered a leakage, but a company which was part of their system management. PayPal data, they can be shared with all this diversity of means to auditing purpose, commercial purpose, public relations, marketing, operational systems in a level of which you can no longer see diversity of players who also have access to diversity of data. So such a reason which we follow today, which is data sucking, that's how we call that at code writing. This logic surpass all relations, and instead of a minimization of a number of data and sharing that with some other partners by different means. What to do to ensure security, where we maximize the data collection and sharing. Tactics for personal data protection can be anchored over these three pillars: minimizing quantity of data to make access to data more difficult, with cryptography, authentications, and physical security of where that information is localized. There is no cloud, internet, and technologies, they are physical. That requires physical safety. A type of information may leak. And as to how minimize the quantity of data, I would add to minimize or maybe assess number of people who access that database. With that in mind, and with the players who participate at those operations where there is collect and data treatment, considering an ideal proportion of care, duties, and transparency. Consumers, citizens, there might be some care duties in the use of technologies, but after all, there is not so much knowledge about what's happening. Different from controller, operators, on those who are treating data for commercial means. And then the idea of the National Authority, Data Protection, MP, as well as other organs that may have the power to check. Civil society, academy, consumers, and authorities exerting pressure for transparency. Think about the controllers, operators, what is supposed to be good practice to exercise this type of care with security and transparency. That is already in that project of law, where they take into account these items, how to treat it, what are you doing, what's the scope, what is the probability and severity, and what are the benefits to mitigate any incident that might happen. In practical terms, in Brazil, we have a number of incidents in which best practices They have not been observed anyhow. $21,000 clients' data, email, telephone, address, CPF, ID, checks, pictures. And on one hand, all of that happened, and the bank said, no, there was no hacking, no invasion, those informations, they are not proper, and they denied it. Uber as well, 57 million users were hacked, 196 from Brazil. And the first reaction was to omit it. And also in the public health app, which had exposed information where they did not consider appropriated security measures to protect health data, which are very sensitive, where you could have a name, CPF, and then access people's health data. We know that name and CPF, they are very easy to get easily. Even the president information was disclosed. So that's not a case of omission, but that probably they did not even consider minimum security issues. We have a script at the websites to assess which websites have the so-called third-party script. And then several governmental websites. You cannot see it, but anyway, never mind. It's like a kind of a record. Google and Facebook, they are in most of the websites, in addition to some other companies' scripts. We have companies on the top, and here analyzed sites. We have not tested the level of vulnerability of each one of them. If we consider all the scandal of the Cambridge Analytica and how Facebook has been dealing with that. Facebook as well, when heard about the leakage, I cannot even say leakage. Researcher used a tool which was a game that Facebook incentivized, so people get more addicted to it. Facebook got a fine by the UK because they failed in protecting in users' informations and to fail to be transparent. And they got a fine of 500,000 sterlings. what is leakage and how to sell it, or maybe to get profits out of that. Is that wrong somehow? But how to qualify? Even if that is non-authorized sharing, there is a PL of data protection, which I hope will be approved as a law, which addresses responsabilization by irregular treatment, as well as not to offering proper security. They talk about preventive measures for protection, and technical issues are under authorities, and what to do in terms of incidents. And the need to announce to authorities that there was a security flaws for something to be done. As to sanctions, I will not get into that. They have a way to measure the infraction, which is quite reasonable.
Vai se averiguar a gravidade.
We will always check the severity, good faith, economical status, several requests, so that penalty will be balanced according to the possibilities of those who hold control of data. What can we do with that? Those incidents, those that I had mapped and listed briefly, which were stated by lack of previous care, omission, that would work as an additional incentive for those companies or public sectors. I will not open that for discussion in terms of the bill or the law we have today. Maybe Laura will address that later on. But I do believe that that bill, as it is structured today, will represent an incentive to consider culture of security as a pillar for future business models with personal data or provision of public services in the use of personal information. That is happening. Internet was developed with the principle of connectivity, and today security and privacy are both being developed by default when we think about protocols and standards, internet standards. A classic example of that is a change from the HTTP protocol to the HTTPS protocols to guarantee encryption of all files. So that represents a very good incentive to the law for that change of culture to consider some threat models as security incidents will keep on happening. And to close, Facebook in Brazil. In the UK, as there is an authority, they had a fine. I don't know exactly how, at what level the MP is now with the analytics. But as we are very close to electoral period, we should consider that also happened in Brazil, and a company which is aligned to exchange and analytics.
Dos países afetados no escândalo.
Você tem essa palestra? Não. The Cambridge Analytics, I should say. Number of citizens, I prefer to use this word than users, citizens who were affected by the scandal. While that's not ready, and remembering about the pyramid, the code has exercised that idea where we can request and test the transparency measures. With that, we developed a plugin to the browser to see how much we have been hidden by ads and publicity at this platform. I have a 1-minute video. Please bear with me. This is a video which we had developed. I hope that may be useful during elections to see who is throwing things on us in the platform. I know that Facebook by itself will come up with some transparency measures, but ours may work in such a way to see exactly what is happening.
Facebook collects and sells all sorts of information based on our browsing habits. How are we being classified? Do we have any control? Fuzzify Me is a browser extension that helps you understand how advertisers target you on Facebook. To start, add Fuzzify Me to your browser. It needs to access your Facebook account, but it won't share any information with other computers. If you have an ad blocker, disable it for now. It won't work on incognito or private mode either. Ads will be outlined in purple on your newsfeed. This means Fuzzify Me is working. Click on the Fuzzify Me icon to open your ad stream. Here, you can see all the advertisers who target you, as well as the explanation Facebook provides for why you're seeing each ad. Do you want to thwart targeted advertising? In Clean Your Ads Preferences, you can check each section from which you want to remove categories. Click on Clean Checked Preferences now to delete all the categories you just chose. You can then see the full list of the categories you deleted back in your ad stream page. Facebook will now have a harder time selling your information to advertisers. Want to hide? Fuzzify.
Esse é a extension, tá em inglês ainda o videozinho, porque a gente não lançou, mas vamos...
This extension, the videos is still in English because we haven't launched that yet. Thank you, Joanna. And you, Laura?
Obrigada, Lucimara. Agradeço aqui em primeiro...
Thank you, Lucimara. I would like to start by thanking JCI for the invitation. I would like to greet all panelists and everyone here. This is the third time that I come to this seminar, such a relevant seminar with very important topics, so much so that now we are going to have the approval of the law. I think that has been wonderful, because we have a law and we have clauses and rules. I'm going to take this opportunity to focus on the correlation between information safety and data protection, and why it is more important than ever, most important than it has ever been, even more important than when we started talking about that in the 70s and 80s. When we talk about information safety and leaks, these issues are very important. There are many cases in Brazil. Unfortunately, Frederico could not come today, but there are many procedures that have been filed by the Public Prosecution Office. I think it has been filed, if I'm not mistaken, a case with Uber. There is one case by Banco Inter, where they proposed a class suit, Netshoes, and some other cases, just to confirm that there are many cases that has really attracted attention of the public opinion, and many cases in Brazil with this similar problem. So what is the correlation between privacy and data protection? If we think about the risks of a leak, any kind of personal data leak are relevant and very serious for the person. There is a theft of identity, so your home address, your bank account, or your password. Someone else can, let's say, sign a contract on your behalf. So this is classical to one theft of data, and that can also cause moral damage, etc. Things that should not have been leaked, if it happens, that will be the consequences. So I think it's important to bear in mind when you talk about personal data, privacy and protection, they are different but complementary. When I talk about information safety, it's not necessarily personal data. So information safety is something broad, all technical and administrative measures such brought by our law, which include maintenance of information with three basic characteristics: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and also authenticity. So 4 basic characteristics of a broader concept of information safety. Personal data protection is focused on personal data, really something that reveals your identity or correlate data to you. They are different but complementary. So Internet of Things, or all the services and things which are getting more and more connected to Internet, this concept is even more relevant. There is an interesting case in Germany. Data protection has always been based on the idea of control, of self-determination and information. And when we think about data leak, the fact that the service is safe or preserving these characteristics of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, they all come before control. In other words, for me to define social network or anything else related to information technology, whether I want to transfer my personal data, whether I want to share data or not, to make this decision, I need something before that. I need that service to be safe, that meet the needs that I expect of it. So the idea of control, of self-determination, only happens if I can take it for granted that the service is safe and has the functionalities that we expect of it. In Germany, there was an interesting case. It was 2008. A law in a German state that allowed Trojan horses by a kind of intelligence agency of that region. So in fact, it was the possibility of having these intelligence agents install a software in personal machines and devices so that all activity done on that time would be monitored 100% of the time. A number of complaints were filed against this state law that allowed the use of the Trojan horse software. Law was very weak. It's from 2007, and everyone expected it to be considered non-constitutional, unconstitutional, as a result of the right to protect your information, something that had dated from 1983 as a fundamental right acknowledged by the constitutional courts in Germany. What has really surprised people is that the judgment in 2008 did not use the concept of self-determination, this kind of right, but rather it created, based on the concept of the general entitlement to personality, and they extracted a new fundamental right to deal with that. It was then called a information technology fundamental right. So concepts of information to build a right. So fundamental right to the integrity and confidentiality of information systems. So classic concepts. So people are entitled to have information, personal information systems. Can be a notebook, can be electronic diary, smartphone. So personal systems may ensure or have to ensure confidentiality, integrity of information contained by it. So the violation was perpetrated by the government, so police or a national intelligence agency, but the fundamental right was not perceived as an obligation that those personal systems would adopt some specific safety measures. And that's exactly when it got really clear that even before we can assure self-determination and control, we have to guarantee safety of these systems, just showing you that we changed upside down, so to speak, the right. Now let's bring it back to Brazil, to our reality. What do we have today with this law? We have made two very important progresses here. One, a horizontal application, which is the characteristic of this law. So online, offline, large, small companies. So everyone from public to private sector, everyone will adopt measures, safety measures, when dealing with personal data. I think that this is the first major big breakthrough. We used to have a general binding norm. No, we didn't really. In our internet legal framework, there was some binding norm, but very restrictive. And for the public sector, there were some additional directives, some administrative acts, talking about information safety, but there was no horizontal obligation to adopt measures to make sure that the information was kept safe. And where is it in the general law of data protection? Two relevant points. As a principle, Articles 6 and 7. So safety, effectively, and then the law conceptualize technical and administrative measures that can provide access to data and also accidental or non-intentional accident. Principle of prevention, adopting measures to provide and avoid damage, and directly Article 46, which is really what mandates all agents to adopt technical measures of safety and administrative measures to protect personal data. So I think that this is the main advance that we had in our legislation. The second one is the fact that to that moment, we didn't have any norm that forced pre-warning. All companies and everyone who treat data would warn the authorities and citizens about that specific data management. Without that previous report, and that's how it's called in the US, with that required report, there was a kind of, those practices were hidden. So adopting these measures as well as informing, reporting it to the authorities and to citizens. And thinking conceptually, what would be administrative measures, not only related to software or cryptography, and use all technical measures applicable, but also administrative measures. For example, everyone in one specific area of a company or a public agency would have to determine which are the people who have access to some specific information, making it very clear that not everyone will have access to all information. Educational measures for staff. So administrative measures that are going to provide information safety. So I think that these are the two major breakthroughs in our legislation. Another interesting point to make, and the Privacy by Design panel, we will address it, it's the idea that information safety has to be thought when the product or service is being created. When we think about privacy by design, it's the idea that the design of that product, the design of that service has to be pre-thought so that we can minimize data use and any damage that might happen. And there are two articles, clauses in our law that reinforce this idea of privacy by design. Even though the concept is not expressly stated, we can extract and derive that, especially of Article 49 of our proposed law. Systems should be structured so that they can meet the requirements of safety, best practices standards, and governance standards and general principles in the law and additional regulations. Even though it's not expressly stated, this article evokes the idea of privacy by design, that the design per se has to be thought up front to protect data and to protect safety secrets. So the authorities will really favor the control of personal data. And this really makes us think better about privacy by design. As we are still at the initial inception of our law, it's going to be approved or not, and then it's going to take 1.5 years before it's fully enforced. So I think we can stop and think about the challenges related with it. The first challenge brought by Article 46. Article 46, paragraph 1 states that the authorities will have to set standards. So one challenge to be thought is, how is that going to happen? How can it be effective? How can it be updated? So as safety is always thought based on possible measures that citizens expected to be taken in one specific moment. So how can these measures be timely? How can the authorities set measures for different sectors, always thinking about the different risks? So the leak of Banco Inter, allegedly, some passwords leaked. So there is a different level of risk compared to others. So how can authorities determine standards and at the same time deal with the reach of all potential industries that are subject to the new law, but at the same time dealing with the different levels of risks? I think this is one challenge. Another challenge is to implement privacy by design. It's a very interesting concept, a concept that has been since the very beginning of data protection, but it's much more relevant today. The idea that I can protect privacy and have to prevent privacy through technique and technology, not only through rules and regulations, but technology can provide protection itself. And how can we encourage the industry to adopt these technical standards? What are the incentives that can be considered so that we can have, from the very moment of design, this concern about privacy? Now, coming to my conclusions, these challenges are quite relevant. I think that maybe one more challenge would be the citizen. Citizens have to be familiarized with these measures. They have to value and to purchase products that really protect privacy so that this differentiation can be made. And the main conclusion to be drawn, and what is the main benefit of this law and of having an authority, someone who is effective, who has a power of sanction? What is the main benefit? The benefit is that basic idea behind data protection, having a flow of data in information society, which will only happen if the citizen, the consumer, if all stakeholders can really trust on the communication infrastructure. I'm not going to buy a refrigerator that is connected, or I'm not going to buy personal assistants. I'm not going to migrate my whole life to some specific technology tools unless I trust that the products and services will really protect my privacy and information safety. I think this is the main foundation of the law and of its implementation, which is ultimately to generate more trust on the communication infrastructure so that we can effectively have more innovation and a data flow which is appropriate and protecting fundamental rights in the information society. Thank you very much.
Muitíssimo obrigada, Laura.
Thank you, Laura, for your wonderful presentation with very important points. So, privacy by design and safety by design, which is not present in most of the products we have in the market now. Let me hand it over to Nelson. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the invitation of CGI, and I'm delighted to be in a panel together with women, knowledgeable women. I'm so glad to be back here. For 15 years, I worked for UOL, which was, and I was responsible for the safety of the UOL provider, then Itaú, and now I'm back to contribute to the society overall. I am a CTO, CSO of C6 Bank. It's not a fintech, it's not a startup either. It's a commercial bank, but we are in the last stage of approval with central bank. We've licensed to operate. We can operate for payment lines only. And our main purpose is to surprise people with true experience transforming a banking experience. It's an opportunity to reduce the monopoly that really bring abusive and outrageous rates to consumers. Let me give you a more technical view. It is a presentation in English because I brought this topic to MIT 2 weeks ago to share that with American universities about the Brazilian landscape. If we analyze the positioning in the world, the chart you can see here, since 2011, hacking attacks have increased its complexity and have become more and more sophisticated in recent decades. When we look to the line from 2011, 400 days, which is the average time that it takes for a company to detect it has been invaded. And it went down from 400 to 100. It's amazing. Globally, companies take more than 100 days to detect an invasion. If it takes more than 100 days, imagine how long it's going to report that or inform its users. No matter how much it has progressed, we still have got a lot to do. And the size of companies, and I'm not only going to talk about the number of bases or attacks, but it encompasses here safety, companies, large banks. JP Morgan's one of the largest banks in the world, $500 million per year, had their database impaired. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when we think about security and safety all over the world. What about Brazil? I don't know if you have the same perspective that I do, but it's nothing to celebrate. But during the Olympic Games in 2016, we had the greatest denial of service attack focused on financial organizations. And thanks to the work and the support of FEBRABAN, the community, central bank, we managed to support the attacks, and nobody informed that no customers were impacted. But it shows that something unexpected was happening. When we look here, 1 year later, November 17, it's a digital attack maps. It's a Google tool that monitors attacks all over the world. And this is the natural volume of attacks all over the world. And when we look closely, you can see packages and attacks all focused in Brazil. On that day, internet in Brazil was somewhat shaken because if anyone accessed services outside, communications were obstructed because the purpose of this denial of service was to impact infrastructure. It was a denial of service of more than 1 tera of impact. And once again, who's behind it? And why was it here in Brazil? Some months later, well, 2 months later, they were used to bring down the largest American websites. Then information made the media, and everybody knew about tools. We have an international cooperation between the FBI, Interpol, and others to arrest a hacker from Israel who would sell services, pay-as-you-go services, cloud services, to have distributed attacks all over the world. So with little money, you could purchase the tools to bring down an entire country network. When we look closer to a different scenario related to financial fraud, maybe you have observed that Brazil was one of the first countries to implement chips in our debt and credit cards. And why is that? Because it's easy to clone the magnetic card and then you can replicate and keep on using it. Brazil was one of the first to implement this technology. Now all cards have a chip. And it's a world case. I don't know if you know it, but Brazil is a reference in financial cyber safety, I mean. And if we observe what is happening all over, the same technology that was tried to be used here in Brazil to fraud the cards was used to clone cards in the US. There you insert the card with a chip and it doesn't even ask for a password. So they didn't complete the process of implementation, but the way that it has set up, which is based on security by design concepts, they were not implemented. And as a consequence, there were many, many frauds and attempted cases. And also jackpotting that we've had so much. So ATM machines were exploded because of that. Because now it's more at the digital level. It's much easier to try to have an exploit or to have an attack directed to an ATM than test TNT at home, dynamite at home, where the risk of explosion is much higher and it's much more serious.
The same technique, the same type of attack that has been shared everywhere else. So that does not represent any joy, as it's some harmful, and take those digital weapons that were used not just here, but everywhere else. So how secure are we? How can we answer to accompany our level of security? First, we have to understand what is exactly to be secure. Have you all reflected upon that? What is secure? In my previous slides, where we noticed that the largest banks, companies, governments were invaded, as well as large, powerful nations, the only certainty is that we will be hacked. There is no 100% security, and we have to break that paradigm that we can protect 100%. That's not possible, and the only way we can protect us is by measuring. If we do not measure, we do not manage, and we have to increase our security maturity at all levels, public, private, organizations, and of course to close the chain with our users that play a very important role in that chain. And if we cannot get 100% protection, we have to find ways to detect that as fast and respond even faster. In my personal CPF number, after 15 years working for CGI, I say that privacy care is a matter of social responsibility. Let's not forget about that. From a more technical perspective, and this scenario, the Brazilian scenario and cybersecurity touch points in Brazil, there are three main pillars. The first one, vulnerability correction. Much is discussed. Let's implement artificial intelligence, machine learning, find a new silver bullet to that problem. But yet, that's not enough. If we do our traditional work well done in a basic way, if we get those old guidelines available for the past 15 to 20 years. I even had collaborated to revise some of those guidelines. The first idea is to update systems. Is that your cell phone which is not updated, your computer? How long will that take for companies to update their systems? And within that scenario of companies which were invaded, 80% of all problems were related to systems update. Next, how to automate controls, how to get a rather holistic vision about the platform once that is not possible to have control over all the points in your organization. So if you start working in a secure manner since the very beginning of the design, by design, security has to be implemented since the first level, conceptual level. By doing that, we will break a paradigm where security is the department that refuses everything. You want to access a website, you cannot. You want to reach a system, you cannot. But throughout a P&L and a business plan to launch a product, at the end of the chain, security comes and says, well, we do need a number of controls, basically security controls at home, which is quite expensive, and also to have security at systems that also costs a lot. So security has to be implemented since the very beginning as part of the design perspective. How about cloud? We are a bank which was 100% born within cloud, and cloud adds great benefits. If we follow the development of technology since the mainframes, shared computers, in cloud, we cannot compete to that. If you talk about FPGA, a fast processor to process machine learning or data, you cannot even buy that in China. Just a few companies, they have these equipments available, which were produced under specific characteristics. If we follow the cloud security allowance standards, a number of requests will allow much more security and fastness to protect services and products. We may maintain our database encrypted in real time, control automation. We minimize need of too many people operating, and we can have a better forecast of what is going on within the system. And that increases together with your development. Some challenges, some of them are low investment in identifying and monitoring threats. We live in a rather globalized world, and that information exchange is vital. A hacker that started in Spain attacking or hacking telco that started there at 5 a.m. in Europe on a Thursday. throughout a group of intelligence, we were warned about that. And with that, we could take the IOC and define measures in Brazil as that wave would reach us. And so we did. So it's very important to be always ahead and to cross that information, because in that very competitive scenario which we have in our country, when we think about security, fraud, if we do not play together, we'll be playing against somebody else. So we have to be together with same goals, exchange information, best practices, because any security problem, it will be critical to the ecosystem. And to hire security professionals is not as trivial as you may think. That's a hard work which we have to start since the schools, colleges, they never explain how to develop a secure code. We see several actions. We have worked with the Safer Net, and how to improve that, and to have some awareness to have more people collaborating to the security of the ecosystem as a whole. We have to debate, we have to discuss as how we exchange information, how long it will take, to detect a new threat into the system, and to be fully tuned and collaborate to new norms, bills, drafts that will enhance our security. And we feel so proud in terms of security standpoint comparing to other countries. The central bank resolution represents a great achievement to the financial sector. Central bank, I should congratulate central bank for its first version released. No other resolution or norm stops its first version. On the contrary, it keeps growing. And here they address two main topics: protection and all procedures for cybersecurity, and second, information in the cloud computing environment. We acknowledge the importance and competitive advantage, which can be very safe or secure as long as you do it properly. Risk culture. Risk culture will be present at all chains of our ecosystem. How can we citizens educate our family? I have a personal example. My grandpa, who is 87 years old, who never got any virus in his computer, and he uses computer every day. When there is no internet connection, he always calls me because he wants me to do something, but I'm not always I can help him, right? When I visit him, he's got a list, and I feel so proud of that because he has a list of questions. Nelson, what is Facebook? What's Twitter? What is LinkedIn? And why do you want to know more about Facebook? I ask him. And then he says, because your mom always takes pictures of our birthdays and meetings, and then she posts it, and I'd like to see them. Then I say, so I need your email. And then he says, why do they need my email? Then we created an email for him to get access to Facebook. Then I say, well, your profile needs a very picture. Let's try to find one that you look really nice. And then I say, well, Facebook profiles is individual. It's not like it's not the couple. And then And then he says, no, please, I want to have a picture together with my wife because everybody will know that I'm married and not a single man. Well, the criteria that he uses not to get into a fish because he won't believe that he will win the lottery or that he's been cheated. Now, all of that adds some awareness, but that is 1 in 1 million. So please let's deal and work with culture, with all users, especially children that are connected the whole time. We are going through a generation transition, like motorboy crimes. They will focus on people who are older and maybe do not have so much information about that. So we have to raise awareness and take that risk culture to other organizations where everyone else will be involved. That's it for now. And always we have to give a step ahead to identify if there is any harm ahead. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nelson. Awareness and phishing. That is even a data leakage. An executive from a company get an email talking about something. If they are not aware, they will click, they will get contaminated, and all the privileges that that person has will be rendered to somebody else, to an external part. So this is a way as how we can avoid data leakage. We still have 15 minutes left. I will open for your questions right away.
Boa tarde. Eu sou advogada e eu estive no último ano estudando proteção de dados em Madrid, com a entrada da nova lei agora.
With the new law in the European Union, I have a comment to make. Madrid and Spain, they have a personal data protection law since 1999, so for the past 19 years. And during that time, they enhanced competence advocacy to advocacy for competence, unfair competition, high regulatory control agencies to have access to data protection. So the judicialization or other systems were quite not used, but the cartel thing was much more efficient. At the time, the whole companies or the whole process to have adoption of companies to avoid wrong use of it. So we have those laws already passed in Brazil, but we don't do much in terms of people's protections. You may capture information, and that represents an advantage. Advertisement agencies also, they use that, but not as a cartel standpoint. So what is your position? After 20 years of experience in the European Union, well, after all, we should take something from them. Well, there is no MP representative here today, so I apologize, but yeah, unfortunately, there is no one from the public prosecution to answer to that question. I have two questions. I'm here representing the University of the State of São Paulo. Consumer code. And I also have another question which has to do with those companies that are listed in the stock exchange. Much is said that it's not our duty to notify incidents of information. And just now, after Article 48, which makes that mandatory, but still we have two elements that could maybe address all of that. those stock exchange listed companies, we have the relevance of the fact any act from the company that could maybe affect the regulation, where when they have a real estate quote that has to be informed, that has to become public. That was done by Annette Schulsack, but I don't know if for CVM as well. So those companies which are listed in Brazil, don't you think that maybe it would be mandatory to inform the regulator? And as to CDC, we have the recall Article 10, which states that anytime there is a flaws in customer service or in providing some sort of service, and if that represents any harm to consumers, that should be notified. So, summing up my question, isn't it a duty to notify authorities and consumers in case of leakage of information protection, being you a citizen or an investor? One last question to be added to these other two questions. I am Marina, representing Verizon Telco. To a daily penalty, the amount is limited to 2% of the revenue or 50 million. I cannot answer you that. I'm sorry. Let's try to answer questions in the order. So the first question is, how do we deal with that for cartel, the use of information to defeat it? Unfortunately, we have anyone from the ministry. Maybe someone would like to say anything about that?
Acho que de qualquer forma, mesmo não sendo advogado, e não vou me arriscar a exercer nenhum comentário sobre nenhuma lei específica, por exemplo.
As far as I know, for data production, regardless of which one we are following, in terms of best practices, we should try not to reinvent the wheel and try not to make the same past mistakes, and maybe to create an evolution of what is working somewhere else and to turn that to our reality, to our region. Those available tools that we have at CDC and CVM, if maybe public companies would disclose a case of data leakage. Anyone would like to comment on that?
Obrigada pelas perguntas, tentando responder as três numa mesma resposta. Acho que não sou Ministério Público, né? Falo aqui como professora.
I'm here as a teacher. The law of data protection aims to establish minimum standards. The idea behind the fact that all agents in all sectors, they have to comply with a minimum standard as to information flow. This is the idea behind the general law, and this is the reason why some of us advocate for not just having sectorial laws without excluding some sectors such as the public, the financial, or any other sectors. The general law idea aims to allow minimum standards to all sectors where all agents are competing under the same terms. This is the reasoning behind the law, right? About the penalties, we still have to understand the specific application of each one of the devices. Maybe we have to wait for that to see what will be charged or not, what will be the penalties, and we hope that the core of the law is preserved, but that daily penalty, it refers to a limit of paragraph 2, which states 2% and a total of 50 million. Without hindering anyone else, those from legal sector know exactly that several interpretations are possible. And answering to Renato's questions, I do agree. I think we can say that there is an obligation with the Consumers Code article. I do agree when you say that it's possible. The law advances because it brings information, concept, exchange of personal data. It is not restricted to consumerism. So I guess that this law can guarantee and support that interpretation based on a device which is expressed in that Article 10. In addition to law by itself, we'll have also to deal with some cultural issues and how companies deal with that. Just by exchanging intelligence information to protect ourselves against hacking. I had the pleasure to be the founder of the cybersecurity, and the first thing we did that was to exchange information among everyone. If the attack is happening somewhere, you have to share it, preserving all the privacy and confidentiality, of course, but that would represent an advantage for everybody else to get protected. That's not just a problem here, but abroad. MIT has got some recent research as how to motivate that proactive exchange to fight the evil. That will represent a challenge for the law enforcement and also cultural. If we are able to break that paradigm and if we all play at the same side, we will all become much stronger, and that is indeed a privilege to all. One final comment about the competition law. The data protection law enforcement applies as well to some other agencies, which will see database as a differential, and that cultural change where you see the database as an asset, and if you enforce the law, we could consider those systems as well, and not just authorities would be investigating or making the proper surveillance. Ideally, we should have a law that take that to everyone, and everyone is aware of the rules of the game. Well, there are still those that think about if that is a consumer relationship or not, if I work for free and things like that. data sharing among those institutions that want to dispute or maybe to protect themselves against any threat which you know that is happening somewhere else and you fear that will take to you. This is what we do every single day in responding to incidents. And then we have that idea, well, I got a piece of information that there is a certain commitment here or there, and I have to notify that institution that it's suffering a leakage or if there is a vulnerability to be explored. All of that can also affect our routine as how we treat incidents. How can we share information that I got, that I have, but do I have to notify others? Well, all these topics and issues will be discussed with Danilo in our forum in September. And this is an area which widely affects our work. How can we keep on collaborating to raise the security bar and to help others? Respecting the law in terms of what are you allowed to do or not. Let me then wrap up and thank all the participants, Nelson, Joanna, and Laura, for your brilliant participation and how comprehensive your approach was.
De fato,
as a matter of fact, although we discuss about privacy and innovation, if they are in opposite sides, innovation is just possible if I have no privacy or no data protection. When we talk today about ubiquitous computing, in fact, we have to see that much more than much more than a conflict, but as if one would add to another. That economy will go on if that is based on data, and if, on the other hand, I have trust that people will trust that systems are secure and they can protect data. So we should not see that as conflict, but as interdependence of these two topics. There is no 100% secure, neither online or offline, and not being 100% secure is not a good reason not to get protected. That cultural change should understand that secure investments on security are investments that will protect the company. Protect the company, the image of the company, and all the company's investments. Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, Joanna. I'd like to congratulate you all for the participation, and thanks for your participation. That's it. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking you for being here this afternoon. I'm really glad to be here. Our panel is revisiting privacy, personal data protection, and privacy by design and privacy by default. Privacy by default is a very nice term, and privacy by design is very interesting because it brings it to the level of a right, and it starts as a pillar, really as a writing it from the beginning. We have here Andrea Toniato with the city administration, Gustavo Gaz with Tori Potter, Natalie Gezango, Facebook, and Bruno Bione with NIC.br. Gustavo, can you go first? Tor project is related to design, privacy by design. I'm Gustavo Gus. I work in Tor project. I'm also organizer of an event named CryptoRay. It's a 24-hour on safety and privacy. I would like to start by showing you a video.
We've gotten very used to the internet. We're constantly sharing information about
And it's in English.
Lives. Food we eat, people we meet, places we go, and the stuff we read. Let me explain it better. Right at this moment, if someone attempts to look you up, they will see your real identity, precise location, operating system, all the sites you have visited, the browser you used to surf the web, and so much more information about you and your life, which you probably didn't mean to share with unknown strangers who could easily use this data to exploit you. But not if you're using Tor. Tor browser protects our privacy and identity on the internet. Tor secures your connection with 3 layers of encryption and passes it through 3 voluntarily operated servers around the world, which enables us to communicate anonymously over the internet. Tor also protects our data against corporate or government-targeted and mass surveillance. Perhaps you live in a repressive country which tries to control and surveil the internet. Or perhaps you don't want big corporations taking advantage of your personal information. Tor makes all of its users to look the same, which confuses the observer and makes you anonymous. So the more people use the Tor network, the stronger it gets, as it's easier to hide in a crowd of people who look exactly the same. You can bypass the censorship without being worried about the censor knowing what you do on the internet. The ads won't follow you everywhere for months, starting when you first clicked on a product. By using Tor, the sites you visit won't even know who you are and from what part of the world you're visiting them, unless you log in and tell them so. By downloading and using Tor, you can also protect the people who need anonymity, like activists, journalists, and bloggers. So download and use Tor, or run a relay.
Bom, então, falando um pouquinho sobre o que a gente vai ver hoje.
In addition to the video, I'm going to tell you what Tor is, some products that Tor develops, and perspectives that we've been developing in my center.
Acho que esses eixos eles já foram bem debatidos ao longo dos dias aqui no seminário, e acho que ponto que
maybe something which has not been constantly addressed yet is the fact that there is a threat of surveillance, sometimes family spouse or a former spouse, and Tor is important for that. For example, bosses surveilling, for example, employees or ex-spouses. So Tor can be used for that. It's not only for an activist, for a blogger, or someone highly exposed. What is Tor? Tor is a free software, an open network. It's a tool to mitigate surveillance and censorship in the internet. Tor is a not-for-profit organization based in the U.S., and it's Tor, capital T-O-R. So you use that to connect to Tor network. It hides your location and minimizes it. Tor looks like a VPN or a proxy, but it's much better than that. Tor is a network of servers throughout the world executing the software.
Como funciona essa rede? Primeiro, eu gostaria de falar.
I would like to tell you
como a internet funciona, né? Então,
if you are connected in the Wi-Fi of this event, you would be part of this chart. If there is a malicious attack collecting data, the person will see what website you access. If you are not using HTTPS or Tor, they may get access to your password and data. Not only someone malicious, but also an internet provider or someone who hosts the website, etc. If you are using Tor and HTTPS, this person who has a malicious intention is not going to see you anymore. The only thing the person will know is that you are a Tor user, and that will be it, and so on and so forth. The same with your provider. Internet provider will just know that you are Tor users, and that will be it. And the same to website provider. It's Tor user only. So this is a way of guaranteeing your anonymous position, even if someone is on the same Wi-Fi as you are. If it's an open Wi-Fi, I recommend use Tor. And what's the difference between Tor and VPN? VPN has a design of trust. We believe that the information will be stored and there will never be any leak. Tor's design is very different. We do not store data because it's a network of servers all over the world. We do not control them. We just develop the software, and it's executed and run all over the world. In each server of a Tor network, there is a layer of cryptography. When the first server knows who you are, they know there is a packet to be sent in encrypted, and the last one connect that. But the first server and the last server do not know who that person is, what the person is doing, or who the person is. Tor's design is made to hide who the person is and what the person is doing in the internet. What are the metrics of Tor network? There are over 6,400 servers in the world. Most of them are in the US, France, and Germany. There are few relays in our Sul Global. In Brazil, there are about 40 servers. There is a stigma in the users of Tor, and one of my roles is to convince that there is a different perspective of who these users are. If you want to know about network metrics, you can get to know more about users, which country has more connections. Connections are not necessarily users, right? everything is public. You can know who the server is, how much traffic is going through it, etc. There is a Tor navigator, a browser. It's a Firefox with some safety patches, some safety repairs to protect so that there is no leak. Nobody knows which website you have accessed if you are using Tor, and other websites cannot see what you were checking. And this is what we call cross-tracking. There is fingerprinting as well, so I'm not going to go into details. And there is nothing documented in the hard drive, no history, no trace of what has been done. So this is the benefits of our Tor browser. Firefox and Onion. Why is it an onion? 3 layers of encryption. It's not garlic, it's onion. We also another service and product in Tor, and we call it onion.onion. And this is the most confusing part of it. Some have heard about Tor, and maybe it has given a wrong impression. These are connections that do not go into an unsafe internet. They are just within Tor network. So a server hosts a page, a social network, and people can connect, and the entire connection will go through Tor network, never going into the unsafe user perspective. I don't know who the server is, where it's hosted, who executes it, etc. So there is a guarantee of anonymity on both ends. The whole connection is encrypted end-to-end. There is no need to use HTTPS to maintain or to guarantee protected traffic. Another important thing, and people tend to ask it, Tor is not a provider. If someone is using Onion, a network, it is a server in some specific location, a data center, whose traffic is going through Tor and internet. And .onion, it is a pseudo domain that only works within Tor. So many people say, well, what is it? It's like a parallel web. Not really. It's just something that maintains end-to-end encryption, end-to-end anonymity of server and its location. Anonymous location is a property, but there are many services that do not want to be anonymous. Some services just want end-to-end encryption and end-to-end authentication. Some examples. We have Project Tor, Crypto Rave, The Intercept, The New York Times, Facebook, Debian Project, and so on and so forth. There are a number of other organizations that use .onion. We wish we could have more organizations, especially human rights organizations, would implement Onion services to ensure privacy and anonymity of users. There is one more tool that uses Onion network, which is called Onion Share. It is someone who works in Tor project, and you can share safely and anonymously files. And if the person downloads the file, the service is gone. It's a tool developed by a developer in Intercept to safely and anonymously share files among two parties. Sometimes people want to know what are the secrets among journalists. So to ensure safety, they started using Onion Share. what are our main assumptions and main initiatives? Educate about the benefits of Tor, internet levels, deep web, nothing of that really matters. What we have is one single internet. Onion network is an open network. You just have to use Tor to join it. And there is an important benefit for those who think globally. It's really necessary in many places of the world. Maybe in Brazil right now, we don't need it. I don't know. But maybe in the future, we will need it. There is legal and political uncertainty in Brazil, and it has been so since 1964. We'd also like to disseminate Tor to other human rights defenders, journalists, activists, bloggers. So we want people to use Tor so that they can keep their own privacy. Laws sometimes are not enough to prevent illegal surveillance or abusive collection of data. So using Tor can protect you against that. We also want to improve the experience of our users. One of the things that we do not know is we don't collect private data. Firefox collects what you are doing, where this is something that can disclose the identity of our users. Therefore, we do not collect this kind of data. How can we improve our products? We have a team of user experience in Tor. They run training programs. They connect communities of users to hear from them. So how can we improve our Tor browser? Do you think it makes sense? So to collect this kind of feedback and improve the browser without violating people's privacy. Another thing we want to do is to break with the myth of dark web. There are not 4 or 5 or 10 levels of internet or things of that nature. There is a graph used in many things that web is just the tip of the iceberg and everything else is the deep web. Well, it's quite the opposite. One of the things that Tor has done was to analyze how many sites were hosted in the Onion network. So there is a mistake of proportion, which is done primarily to criminalize users of Tor and disseminate the agenda that the internet is dangerous. Using Tor, your internet won't be unsafe. You'll be protected by 3 layers of encryption, and your connection will go through servers all over the world, fully safe. Another thing that I would like to have is to increase diversity of operational systems and servers of Tor network. Most use Debian. I use Debian. I like it, but it's dangerous to have one single option only. So we would like to enhance diversity to some other types of operational systems, such as Flip, BSD, OpenBSD, etc. And also enhance the number of autonomous systems. We would like to hear what system administrators could help Tor evolve. Well, after all, they are encrypted data that are connected to Tor network, and we are helping millions of people all over the world to protect their privacy. That's it. Thank you very much. Here you have my email. If you have any questions, we've had some Tor meetups all over the world. Soon there will be one in Brasilia, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Obrigada, Gustavo. Tem uma pergunta. A gente sabe que os problemas da Deep Web não estão...
Well, we know that web problems are not only related to onion, but some of them are. Drug trafficking and pedophilia and other things. It's impossible to track them down. How can we ensure safety? Users that use more Tor will mean greater safety. There had been some federal police activities against illegal websites, and I think federal police could talk about that. And users can also make reports. Absolutely, absolutely. Something that would be helpful would be to have Onion service to collect anonymous report. I know people that are selling drugs, so this is my name and my number. Nobody will do that. So it would be great if we could have anonymous report, and Tor can facilitate that. We have Security Drop, which is used by journalists all over the world to make reports and collect reports anonymously so the journalists don't know who the sources are. The same happened in Italy with a different software. The police used it to receive reports of corruption and illegal conduct. Through Onion Network, you can present your reports, including what happens in the network itself. Natalia is going to give us the corporate side of it. Thank you for the organizers. Thank you, Bruno, for finding time for all of us to be here today and working on the agenda. I'm going to talk about by design, privacy by design, sharing the experience that we have had for a while now, but launched it a few months ago, sharing the experience we have had in recent years. So I'm going to refer to TTC Lab, which is something that we have been doing for a while. We heard here a lot saying that privacy does not exist in the vacuum. We have to engage people in this culture of greater control and transparency so that we can have trust in the digital environment. And TTC Lab is exactly that, privacy by design, through which people can have interfaces that empower them to control how data are being used, where we can have a more transparent experience in the way that data are used. TTC Labs is a portal in which we share resources and prototypes by design based on real case, real people. We've done that with over 60 partners in the world, and it caters the need of lots of people. DPO, those interested in implementing rules and regulations, up to designers, web designers, or designers of user experience. It covers a multidisciplinary spectrum. We also have OpenShare, and privacy by design workshops that we have done all over since 2017. And there was one here in São Paulo 1 year ago, August last year. My personal experience as someone with a background in law, public policies, participating in this workshop, which was here in São Paulo. So there I was in a room with engineers, designers, lawyers. From designer to a lawyer, we normally try to come up with commonalities. So those who are analyzing the rules, those who deal with policies, we talk about right of access, right of correction, portability or transferability, consent, informed, free informed consent. Designers trying to reach more transparency and control on the products that they are designing, focus on something that they call services that bring people and make people understand how the services are used and how interaction progress throughout time. Rather than talking about rules and rights, they based on design principles. Products have to be timely. When you design an interface where you expect the action of a user, it should be timely. When you use a service, the request of sharing of the location would be timely exactly when we need that. Let's say if we are working on rights, joint rights, and it should be always convenient to the user. If you're purchasing, let's say, an airline ticket, the design of your email would allow you to see the key information highlighted so that your life will be easier.
Some of the principles applied for the prototypes are principle of transparency, information that can be easily understood by all, and to allow people not only to have that available to themselves, but to execute and to use that into practical terms. Although the goals of this spectrum between rules and designs are similar, it may be that feeling quite anxious to fulfill the strict rules and norms, the human element, which is in the center of rules and design principle, get lost. And anyone who had lived this huge number of emails between last May and beginning of July know what I'm talking about. This is reflect upon some other attempts between digital services and users. When you get into the website and there is a cook burner, which has nothing to do with your experience flow in that platform, or maybe it's the same experience when you have the service where control configurations over its security, they are impossible to be found or implemented. So if you try to comply with rigid, strict rules from design standpoint are lost. Examples, they show how much or how can you build up those prototypes, and as they go beyond of just meeting the requirements or the rules. And it's also a consequence of the right, which forgets that a right starts from a human right. Professor Margaret Hagan, who is in charge of the legal design lab at Stanford University, addresses about that. And she talks as how can we not only the digital environment, as how it's not possible to put aside the human dimension of the rights, as how people think, how they feel, and how they learn in the best way. In that threshold between these two fields that law has to comply with the human-centered design approach. And all of them seems to be quite abstract yet, And I have two examples as a platform to bring both worlds together. Recently, we had implemented a number of changes at our privacy configurations.
Reiteradamente, foram duas coisas principais que eu destaquei aqui.
Everything in one single place.
Fez, mas em especial na daqui de São Paulo, na de Paris e na de Dublin, ao longo do ano de 2000.
Throughout last year, many people building up prototypes at our offices, recommending that privacy configuration, security, and anything else would be present in the same place, and how to make the language clearly and simple and complete. And some of the ways as we can implement the demand or that feedback was to bringing some elements that were lost for long time, and they were at different tabs. They were floating at different tabs. Another example where that approach was encompassed was in the tool released this year, where you could access information. Few elements and not all categories were available, and the possibility to access information based on additional categories. We have been trying to expand our understanding about that, thanks to the workshops, where we have a collaboration workshop with multidisciplinary teams at Facebook or among guests. Since 2017, workshops were conducted at different sites, including São Paulo, and the final goal was to reach 1 or 2 days of workshops focused on construction with the privacy by design prototypes, where people could use, debate, and so on. All results are available at TTC Labs at the portal. I will briefly show you our design, the one made here in São Paulo.
And so hungry for innovation, and there is so much talent in Brazil. So we thought it was a unique opportunity and timing to bring designers, to bring policymakers, to bring specialists of all fields and get them together in a room to start developing creative solutions around privacy.
Como é que a gente faz para você ter uma privacidade desde o princípio, nos produtos, nos processos? E como que as empresas podem pensar maneiras de ter processos mais francos?
How can company have more clear and transparent processes?
Diverse group of people together from a number of organizations with a number of disciplines and backgrounds. We've given them a grounding in the understanding of the landscape of personal data and of policy and of user experience. And then we've given them the framework on which they can start to build better future experiences.
O que é super especial na ideia de trazer designers para conversar.
The idea to bring designers to talk to people with a legal background. In addition of results and prototypes of discussions, manners, TTC Labs have 4 types of main resources. First one, with designers' articles talking about their experiences at different organizations. A second one, with prototypes. Second one of insights, how they can create experiences. And a third one, with a toolkit for developers, designers, startups that think to implement whatever they want to, being tools itself or events or workshops where they can plan and practice and bring concrete answers to their organizations. TTC Labs is just a starting point. We do not expect to have a specific formula of that specificity by design or how to improve transparency and control. That's why that is a resource based on collaboration since the very beginning. And by just having the opportunity to hear to that multidisciplinary team, we will be able to add our contribution and to incorporate best practices. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. The Facebook business model is based on data collection. Is there any debate for a new model where we can pay or even get paid by information that we make available? And if we will be able to see any change in Facebook mobility? These are topics where we are constantly changing. A number of changes of usability took place, not just a change in the terminology. This is exactly how we base our criteria and our policies. But these are things that keep evolving, so we may expect some novelties in that area. In addition to politics updates, we also had privacy. We had the creation of a specific hub, which are the privacy shortcuts. We changed and decreased the data spectrum. So several changes, and yes, indeed, this is a topic under constant evolution, which we communicate in real time. About the business model, this is a widely debated topic. About that business model, this is the model which has allowed that publicity, sales, allowed small companies to make some publicity. 10 years ago, that would be just impossible for organizations and for companies which did not have highly structured marketing teams and with enough resources. So this is how we see several benefits nowadays. not only in a global aspect, but also in the ecosystem and to the Brazilian economy. Now we have André Tomiato representing the City Hall of São Paulo.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here to talk about the initiatives that we have. I'm here representing the City Secretary of Innovation and Technology, and I think that it's really important to understand this discussion and how it all works. It's really important to all of you, and it has influenced some of our projects and the most important initiatives. Trying to understand the context to the city of São Paulo, it's larger than many countries. We should always bear the disclaimer and compare things that can be compared. Smart cities, which is a project that we are working, the dimensions of the city, the dimensions that we are working with when implementing public policies, and how to deal with them. 130 staff members. It is not easy to deal with these issues and bring them to us. We know that the government tends to be somewhat slower, the public entities. So it's harder than in private organizations in the market. To speak about these initiatives and how these discussions have influenced our decisions, one of the most important things that we have developed is our policy of transparency and open data, which has been discussed for a while. This is something that started with the controllership of the administration. What we try to do is bring the logic of collaboration rather than the logics of control, in which open data, many of the issues concerning open data were addressed in the beginning of this discussion, exactly when it started happening in the government. So we wanted to consolidate the understanding of transparency. We have civil servants. There are a number of exceptions, all of them legal exemptions, secrecy and all that. And this is one of the most important ones. And we want to consolidate this culture of transparency, especially with the training of public agents. As governments tend to be slower, we want to have that continuously implementing improvements in the public service thanks to this collaboration, so to speak. We have important challenges in our policy. One of them should be published shortly, but what we have been addressing is anonymization of data, which is not simply having a name or a document number. There are much deeper issues when you are going to go into details, bringing more transparency to initiatives and what you do in the government. Likewise, there is an important challenge, which is to rationalize the use of data. So we have well-structured data. It makes sense maybe to another agency or to another entity, developing it from scratch, really, so as we can really maintain whatever is important in terms of data privacy and all issues related to that, and we can optimize and rationalize public resources, working integrated initiatives and working with communication. Another important initiative that we've been working on is programming interfaces. We are still very much in the beginning. We have 7 or 8 apps. One of the most interesting ones is how the municipality spends public money. This is open through the web, and it can be accessed through anyone who knows a little bit about the topic. There was a very interesting initiative giving much more transparency to what happens in the municipality of São Paulo, fostering these applications where we can really exchange, bring additional value, and improve the services in our city. Everyone in the government knows that, but it's important to describe at least the experience of those with whom I work. The government does not do things spontaneously. So this collaboration, exchanging with the society, not to control, but to work in collaboration, is something very important that we've been doing repeatedly, and really emphasize that as we use the right criteria, things get really better. Another important thing, and this is a 4-year-old project. This is the electronic processes. If you know the public sector, you know that most of the demands, it works hand in hand through administrative processes. And it's difficult sometimes to deal with that, but we probably recall all documents and stamps. And we are going to put an end to the paper processes. It's something that started some time ago, and it's going to be completed by October. Everything that is in the city administration will be electronically based, and it's directly related to the topic we are dealing here, which is the correct level of secrecy. It's really important to build the training, really, of all the companies. And we know the rule in the public sector is to have public documents, but there are administrative processes that have copy of documents or personal information and a number of other information subject to secrecy. If the public agents are not ready to deal with that, we might have serious problems. So it's a very important work that we've been doing in the city administration, changing the culture. We want it to be used with consistency and knowledge. And within this process, and trying to give more transparency according to what the legislation dictates, we opened for a public consultation. Public processes can be accessed by any citizen through a website. Of course, a lot has been doing so that all public agents know how to appropriately classify information. It's a continuous effort so that we can use things with the appropriate attention. Another thing that we have dealt in the municipal administration concerns responsible use of data centers and cloud hosting. Third time I'm saying that governments tend to lag behind, so the cloud computing took longer to get to us after it had been clearly used in the private initiative. 2 years ago, we started to structure what we called information technology governance, the governance policy. By creating a Secretary of Innovation and Technology, I am a civil servant, Now I am in a leading position, but I've been working in the city administration for a while, and I think this is an initiative that does not depend on who the mayor is. These are things that are being done and will remain. Everyone will be along the same strategic alignment, and the two most important guidelines are to increase the level of maturity in municipal administration in information technology through different initiatives, and also make technology be used more strategically. Someone in IT deals with all first-tier support issues. And what we try is to have better structure so that we can provide more elements so that technology can be used more strategically. For the first time, we have a strategic plan of technology. It's a 4-year plan. And within that, we build clear guidelines according to all the different topics. And one of them that we call technical guidance is acquisition of cloud computing. We have all the strategic unfolding of it, but we have data sovereignty as something really important here. It is something that we've been using, different governments have been using it, especially because within bureaucratic structures, it's difficult to deal with secrecy. There is the nature of someone who works in bureaucracies to work there in its own silo, protected based on projects which are known only by him or her. So we should work on change management and give elements for people to feel safer. And little by little, we can put an end to the resistance and bring the best in technology that has been in the private sector longer. A recent initiative that we've been dealing in my secretary, in coordination with all the other agencies, is the so-called Smart City. Smart City is something that we have had for a long time. Those who know a little bit about that, and we know the examples in Estonia and Western countries. What we want is to have our country, our city, within a context of digital transformation, working with data-based policies. And by doing that, we will bring technological innovation, new tools, and having the government better structured and organized to be more assertive in implementing public policies and not simply reactive, a proactive government in issues which are sensitive to the population, prepared to deal with this wide range of data which are generated and have to be managed so that policies can be implemented, articulating all the different players to make it work and improve the public sector, implementing what we call digital implementation, which is a concept which is not fully understood yet by all servers and by all civil servants. And it's a constant challenge to deal with that change management, bringing up to date all the information we have to help the population. Thank you very much. Thank you, André. Yesterday, there was an event called GovTech with digital governance, and there was a very interesting example from India. They are developing a tool through which people can go through the portal and manage the consent they have given to different services, documents, etc. Do you plan to build or to develop something along these lines? And is there any city that you use as a role model to concern data privacy? This discussion, as is, the level of maturity in the governments somewhat different from what we find in other countries, and India is one of them. It's still not possible, and we still have got a lot to cover. It's an initiative which is really important, and it would be wonderful if São Paulo citizens could manage information at this level. It would be really wonderful if we could have track of that, but still have a lot to cover. We've just started discussing the policy of transparency and open data, and by doing that, we will introduce the first concept of anonymity and all that. It's a very important initiative, but unfortunately, we are lagging behind. Smart cities. Does it already incorporate the future law of data privacy? Yes, absolutely. It's embedded in it. There are different dimensions. I didn't have enough time to talk further about that, but it will be published shortly. We are going to have some administrative acts and dissemination, but it definitely takes it into consideration. So we're going to have questions by the end. Now let me ask Bruno to deliver his talk.
Último painel, 2 dias bem intensos. Vejo rostos aqui que estavam até 9 horas da noite ontem, então parabéns a todos.
Congratulations for all of you who stick to us last night until so late. You all know that I work for NIC.br, but today I'm here to present something regarding my personal ability, capacity. The topic of this panel can be quite provocative to revisit technology, privacy, production of personal data. So I think it's worthwhile looking backwards, see from where we have started, where we are, and how can we prospect and reach the near future. So these are some of the topics that I will try to embrace in this presentation. Well, my goal is to debrief and allow 2 phases. First one, to understand what is the role of technology according to literature, how that can modulate behaviors. Since the 80s, we have information about that just by taking that classic example as how urbanism, architecture condition a behavior. When we see that in some places to assess, for example, on the beach where we would have Caucasian people of more privilege strata where public transportation would never get there, and that was done on purpose to avoid that people from a different ethnic background could not make use of those public areas. That somehow regulates our behavior. More than right to modulate and to standardize the behavior. In addition to that, we have technology, social standards, and the market developing artifacts to condition our behaviors. We have the role of technology to nourish our ability to control information, or maybe to weaken our ability. We have seen some other tools that will weaken that capacity. From a historical background, personal data production, they were very dependent on this type of architectures and technology. How about the privacy concept? The idea is to put ourselves on our private areas. And how can we do it? Well, to be resilient just to our residences where we retract this type of information. Privacy and personal data has always been dependent on this dependence on artifacts of technology. And today we live this dilemma, or at least this interdependence. What are the technologies and how can privacy by design help or support it? There are some places or sites that do not allow it. Many people here today use that stamp to block your cameras. That is a symbolic way as how we do not believe that the devices we use by design, they are set up to protect our information. Zuckerberg himself uses it. That is rather symbolic. If Zuckerberg, who's got several engineers working with him and who could develop other type of technologies, if he also uses this little seal, which is an architecture that cannot control and protect this information, that is a clear diagnosis that we haven't quite got there. We have the privacy by design literature, and here are some books reinforcing those limits. I mean, the law saying what is allowed and what it is not, and how those technologies, they are being prototyped. This is an excellent book by Herzog, who was published this year. We have the concept of privacy by design. The technology, since its very beginning, they should encompass that regulations that were expected by the framework to allow protection of personal data. And we see that in the production of personal data. But that is a critical literature. We'll see that that concept is not seen in practical terms. Those who are hands-on engineers, developers, designers, they did not internalize that completely. That's a quite recent paper by a New York professor who conducted an empiric research saying, well, I'll look at these companies and I will question them, I will make a number of interviews to understand what they consider as privacy as design. His main findings are that they believe that there is that concept of privacy by design, but a bureaucratic compliance to support you in case you have any suits or anything like that. By interviewing engineers, he understands that we are designing technologies without that concern. That's the methodology, designing without privacy, revealing that this concept has no compliance, has not been internalized. And then we have some other papers saying that what we have, in fact, are much more invasive technologies, privacy, invasive technology, as if it was a technological armamentum.
Technologies. E isso tem cada vez mais driblado essas nossas possibilidades e não tem havido mercado que
And there is no market that could give traction to this concept of privacy by design to become lively. Regulated actors that will bring life to that concept to make that more concrete. I mean, how can we have that in a future law to establish those who regulate, to have technologies that will take into account privacy This is what Lee Bygrave says. We still lack of regulatory conversation for that concept to become concrete. Here are my 2 cents. At what extent can we go? The European regulation expects privacy by design, but if we have a more expensive law, we will also find it, as he mentions about the beginning and conception of a product, that will take into account protection of personal data, principles, and so on. But that is not enough. We need or we must have that constructive engagement between regulators and those who are regulated. That is a topic addressed by Boyama yesterday. How to do it? Well, that is happening already. We are thinking differently, and our focus in terms of regulatory actions are being changed. We are changing the way as we think, as we act. And I say that from a European standpoint. Rights, laws, codes, that binary logics of what is authorized, what is forbidden, and what does not get into that, to consider different things such as how to stimulate and to understand the role of private sector, private players to analyze involved risks, mitigate, and manage them. The demand that we had in the past when those laws were thought back in the 70s or 80s, that no longer exists. Now we face a different context. We are skipping from a traditional approach to new perspectives as how we use data. We are getting out of a binary understanding of what is personal, of what is a personal concept. That is a data which is collected to a specific purpose to reuse of secondary data, so users will have a consent for that. This is what is at risk with big data and artificial intelligence. If we see what regulators would tell us 10 to 15 years ago and how that was applied throughout the world, we had a silver bullet to work with that idea of what could represent risks and data that would represent no risk at all, as if it was clear, crystal clear. If I have personal data which can identify someone, I will regulate it, and that will be part of the scope. But once I am able to take elements related to a certain person, anonymous data, I could use that as I wanted to. But both spheres, which before were not connected at all, now they are gray areas. So the idea of anonymous data as if they didn't have any type of risk, and if there was no sort of use for content, publicity, or automated decisions, that is lost somehow. We see researchers that, for fun, they request anonymous database. This is the case of a Stanford researcher who says, I just need 36 bits to get an anonymous data and take that or turn that into a personal one. MIT investigators by metadata of credit card transactions, they were able to redefine holders. How frequent do you buy, how much you buy, and that tells a lot about you. So we are no longer thinking about a binary aspect. If I have personal data that will be regulated and anonymous data that would have no type of risk, and I could turn that immune. And that is becoming more popular. What can authorize you to treat personal data? Consent is very strong, but even more, we see that legitimacy, that is a legal base which allows you to reuse the data without asking for a second consent by users to secondary use. And that represents a dilemma where these people or that organization would use that legal base. Will they be really doing that proportional test and when respecting the holder? Well, that brings more asymmetry. We do not know if that data is personal, anonymous, if it's within the scope of law enforcement, or if those organisms which are treating that data, if they are indeed considering interests of the holder. That represents a scenario of risks and lots of uncertainty. They cannot see the design of the law and think, well, that is a binary logic. I can do it, I can do it, but I cannot do something else, and I will place a penalty to that player. So we are stepping out of a logic of command and control to meta-regulation. What do I mean by that? The regulatory authority will say, well, you have some objectives to be reached. So you can analyze what is the risk that you have at home. And once you report that, once you monitor and identify and mitigate, you can tell me what that represents so I can understand what the risk is. That can be so costly. I have more asymmetric information relations, and I have no ability to do this type of investigation. So we'll migrate to co-regulation scenario. That's why just law expecting privacy by design is not enough. We have to understand how is that applied and how we can open the several mechanisms and instruments to unlock that scenario of cooperation between regulatory authorities. When anytime we have a systematic analysis of personal data, including our future law, where it says I do not have ability to see all sectors to be reached, electrical, energy, offline, and then I will invite those to do what? Codes of best practice. Each sector will tell what are their specificities, risks, and then it will make tangible what is generic, reasonable risks. What is that to your specific sector? To design a model, a product that takes into account personal data production. In health, that is totally different from insurance, which is different from online and offline. We also have to consider third parts, independence, certifying best practices, corporate programs where we'll bring to the table not only lawyers, but engineers, developers, to think together how to project that holistically. And dossiers that they are impact reports to privacy and personal data. Identify involved risks. Once they are identified, you propose the solutions and you implement them. This is our hope of what we can have with GDPR and with the law of privacy data, personal data protection, considering actions of collaboration between regulators to generate an economic demand and an ecosystem of the privacy enhancement technology. Not just the organization which process and control data. No, we'll have an ecosystem, certifiers, peers of the organization creating code of best conduct. All of that together, this is what will be able to change this vision that by design has not taken off. So in addition to forecast of privacy by design, we have to understand this ecosystem, ecology, and how institutions may collaborate to those who regulate. And that's no novelty. The decision was that got to that terminology in the 80s and which opened the door to consider personal data, privacy beyond consent, privacy by design beyond the dashboards where you can know which information is collected, how do you consent, for what means, what is at stake is. How can these organizations have pre-actions to avoid harm? What is the duty of those who know about risks to mitigate risks throughout this toolkit? And to summarize what I tried to tell you today, the idea is to turn that as tangible as possible throughout a new reasoning of a regulatory framework. Thank you so much. My time is up. Here's some merchandise about my book, which will be published by the Forensic Publishing Office. The publisher almost killed me when I told him that I had to publish it as soon as possible, but just bear in mind that my book will be available soon.
Início. Obrigado.
Então, esse livro sai mês que vem?
So is this book going to be available by next month, I guess? I have a question to you, Bruno. You changed that this new mindset goes beyond law, but in case that law is approved with the vetoes that people fear as to authorities, what are the consequences to that rationale? Are we going to reach that somehow? Co-regulation would be the idea of a law with no authority or a multi-sectorial committee. No, not exactly. The co-regulation is highly dependent on an authority that will have the power of veto and penalties and even financial. We want to have those experts that will be able to carry out that discussion. Just a dependent agency will be able to look at the best conduct code, and then they will say, well, you complied with that. And if I consider that you did not comply with one of the principles according to the law, I will consider and calibrate the type of penalty to be executed. It's a way of awarding desirable behaviors. We work in a different mindset. That's why independent authority is key.
Let me now open for the Q&A. Good afternoon, or good evening, rather. I'm Luisa, Institute of Reference, Internet and Society, and I have a question to you, Gustavo. We have to store metadata. How can we do that concerning Tor? And if it's requested through legal orders or court orders, and if I have to submit that, so what do you have for that? How can we request an order, and could we get the identification of users? This is my question. I'm Diana, and I work in the legal department of Team Cellular, and I have a question to you, Natalia. Facebook has launched a tool for facial recognition of photos. It has been subject to some questions concerning privacy and discrimination. I would like you to talk a little bit about the aspects concerning privacy and data protection of this Facebook tool. And as it's provided, does it meet the provisions of the future law that will be approved? Good afternoon. My question is to Bruno concerning database. Database, we have intellectual property if it's a original database. So let's suppose it's a company and there is going to be a merger. If these intangible assets can be commercialized with economic value, considering the new law of privacy and personal data and intellectual property. So, Gustavo, you go first. Wonderful question. I also don't know. I wish I could tell you something. What I can tell you is in the exit node, there is information. One IP has accessed the website. The Tor exit node, we know that the previous server connected there and asked to access the website. So something urgently, we can communicate authorities, but it's no use forcing relay operators to deliver information they do not have. By design, we do not have that. Tor project cannot deliver that because Project Tor does not execute servers. They are volunteers all over the world. So maybe they wouldn't be under Brazilian jurisdiction and they wouldn't deliver that information. Secondly, depending on the country, log collection is not required. There are some exit relays. As far as I know, we have never had any legal issues. But if there is, what can the relay operator can do is hand in IP, Tor network IP, and privacy is still being maintained. Diana, facial recognition tool is optional in our platform. It's within the privacy setup of users, and it can be activated or deactivated. It's not something that you decide just once. And the main purpose of this tool let's say someone opens a profile with your photo. It's a safety issue, so you'd be notified someone has accessed that. If you have friends who have this activated tool that they decided to use it, and there is one photo, the tool can help you or suggest tagging these friends if they have the activated tool. One-third use is as accessibility tool. People who have visual deficiency, visual loss, they can have a better experience, visually impaired, even having a, let's say I am visually impaired, you are my friend, and you have facial recognition tool. If I'm using Facebook in a special mode for people with hearing or visual impairment, then we would use that. It's difficult to talk about compliance because the law hasn't been enacted yet, but the same tool is available here and in Europe in compliance with GDPR and other countries that already have general laws of protection and regulations, such as Canada, for example. Well, let me see if I understood your question. If there is a process of merger, acquisition of one company by the other, what we would expect for database. The first cases about that, whether it will be possible or not, and some cases were submitted to lawsuits, especially in the US, what platforms started doing? They predicted in their privacy policy that in case of mergers and acquisitions, you have consented something. So these terms of use would give this consent to use that. I think that the main difficulty is that if there is a merger and acquisition in a new economic group with one specific purpose different to which the database was constructed or created, then we would have legal safety and maybe question that. And that's the main issue. So what can we expect in terms of scenarios? If there is this process and the database is going to be enriched to another one for a completely different purpose, then you are going to have problems. Maybe you can resort to other legal databases, but the differentiation will be so big, such a different context, that you wouldn't really go through that process of proportionality and all that. So two options. You can expect that, but it won't be enough. It depends on how it's done and for which purpose.
Mais perguntas? Lá.
Oi, boa tarde. Eu sou o Lenildo, da DataPrev.
I'm Lenildo with DataPrev. I would like to ask Gustavo, don't you think it is somewhat unsafe for us, providers in a situation of investigation of some wrongdoing? If the police is going to track back to IP, it's going to get to the exit or not. Don't you think that the server might be in trouble? So we would be implied in the investigation as being maybe an associate. Good afternoon, I'm Jackson. I have been trained in computer science, and now I'm taking also my master. My question is to Andre, and I don't know if you can answer that or not, but as you work in the city administration, maybe you have an answer. I was talking to someone who studied law, and he had said something about public data, about the city administration, and you talked about API, and I checked the city administration website. And there you have data about the tax, territory tax. You can see the name of the person, the address, date of birth, month, and some other information. And you can come up with a profile of someone. You can locate people, and it's open data for the entire city. So my question is there any discussion about data safety? And because legally speaking, there are many companies that make automatic collection, and it's a problem in all the public arena, and you can get sensitive information. And there are two problems. One is technical capability. Is there any planning, any idea on how to deal with that? Because sometimes it's not only, sometimes the system is aware, but you don't have qualified staff to deal with this kind of problem. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Andrea. I would like to thank for your comments. And I have a question concerning privacy by design. And it's a question to all of you. You can all contribute with your comments. But considering the experience of Facebook, how could we bring together these worlds of design, engineering, in the conception of a framework for each company? So I'm talking about not only companies, such as Facebook, and also for small and mid-sized companies. Something executable, doable within the Brazilian universe. I work with data protection for 20 years in other countries, primarily Switzerland. And another thing that I would like to highlight, and the authority, which is going to take office shortly. So you talk about cooperation, authority, but the Brazilian legal model does not have this kind of opening of negotiation with authorities. We see some other kinds of authorities, let's say other agencies. And it seems we're talking about, I don't know, dream when we say we can negotiate with the authorities collectively. So this is my cry for help. Thank you.
Gustavo, você pode responder que a primeira é sobre o TOR.
Opa, vamos lá. Então, obrigado pela pergunta, Danilo. Essa é uma preocupação muito grande.
This is an important question about the legal status. And the first recommendation is never host the exit node of Tor at home, because until you explain that this is just a public infrastructure, it will take a time. They will go in such a home. The good news is there are very few cases of this kind of action, right? There was one case, a recent case in Russia, because of a political comment. The Russian police identified the IP, which was a Tor network IP, and Dmitry Bogotov was arrested, who is a collaborator of web project. So we ran a campaign, supported the campaign to release him, and that was the case after a while. So this is something that we've been doing, and we've been doing together with the community. Say that the relay operator is not responsible for the contents. It's as if I would really arrest the chairman of Telefonica because someone made a comment in a newspaper or server. So we have to educate people about the role of technology, which is private by design. Some other important things. All IPs of a Tor network are public IPs. If someone has done a wrongdoing, you see that the IP belongs to network Tor. So as an authority, as an investigator, they'll say, okay, so someone was using Tor. So it's no use going after the relay operator. The person is not responsible for the content or for the action. Apart from that, there are very few cases. In some countries, it's easier. We just submit a letter, a template letter saying, well, this is a exit node of Tor network. It's part of a public infrastructure. It's not the person responsible for the contents. Done. I hope Brazilian authorities can have a similar level of understanding. Another important thing is to say that if you want to be a volunteer in Tor network, simply install in a server Tor software, and you can select if you can be an exit node or an intermediate node or a bridge node. The intermediate node does not have an exit point. It's just circulation point. So if you want to support Tor network, you can be an intermediate or a bridge node, and they are legally okay in Brazil or even in other countries where the legislation is somewhat stricter, I mean. Jackson, thank you very much for your very good question. Before answering, I would like to say that public authorities, we only do what the lay states that we can do and should do. The federal legislation and the tax authorities, there are some informations of tax secrecy that would help us really allow us to ascertain a certain financial situation. There is another municipal legislation that considers this territorial tax land. They are not subject to tax secrecy. So sharing the data there is within the law. And there is something even broader, which is GeoSampa, georeference data of the real estate registration. They are not available in an app, for example. You cannot download as a lot or a batch. What's available? In the website, it's open for queries, for consultations, one by one. It originally was used for citizens to reach and issue a second copy, and now once there is no longer secrecy of tax, any need to maintain tax secrecy here in the city of São Paulo, it was gone. As to internal qualification to deal with issues such as this is one of the most important missions and the Secretary of Innovation and Technology has in its hands. The technology maturity and lack of maturity is just a reflex on poor public management is an objective, not an assumption. It's part of our work. We want to build the capacity and set clear guidelines so that everyone can do the right thing and implement initiatives according to our strategic planning of having technology governance within limits that are safe to citizens and the city administration. Hope I have answered your question.
A Nathalie tem uma... Tem, né?
A Andrea perguntou como
It was asked how to motivate small and mid-sized companies so they can also encompass those principles of privacy by design. Well, TTC and Labs and Design of Amston, they are in all workshops, the whole public had as their main focus local startups. We guess this is our role to generate resources, all ecosystems, they may use it, especially those who are small, they find it even harder. See, they are all open, they are under a license of Creative Commons. So their idea is to collaborate for small and mid-sized companies so then they can implement that in practice in a very objective way. That draft bill as it is today, and we don't know what will happen later, but as it is, there are a number of drivers and incentives for that health dialogue. There is an article which says that before proposing norms, authorities should carry out public hearings and to present regulatory impact reports. And authorities, in addition to investigate and to apply penalties, there are several attributions which involve to stimulate best practice and to be that contact point where they will motivate best practice. There is a specific a chapter just for that. There is a device which says at the time we applied penalty, the fact that the company developed best practice code that should be taken into account, a very objective way as how we see that draft today. We can have an idea as how that health and desirable dialogue has been promoted. I replicate what Natalie has just said as to those devices, which are triggers to start the dialogue. And we don't need to go too far. If we take a look at other scenarios, the Brazilian one, for instance, Consumer Code of Defense, we had a national system of that code, consumers' code, with NGOs and some other entities which started the dialogue with the regulatory agencies, and that led to what? Best practice, automotive industry, food, what we had before the regulations, before we had a number of automotive accidents, food poisoning, and after that transversal and not sectorial regulation, we finally were able to see best practice and fostering a positive dialogue. We have other examples in the environment which may cause some environmental impact, and that can be transferred to personal data report where you have to describe that impact. We are not reinventing the wheel. That law follows a rationale which has been very helpful in the past when we were trying to build up an economy which was not driven by data. 1 minute to each one so we can close. Thank you for the invitation, for being here, to stick with us after such a long and tiring day. I'd like to make an invitation to visit our multi-platform available to Windows, Macintosh, Linux, or Bot or Fox. Our new name is Store to Android, for Android, and there is iPhone Navigator Onion browser done by a Redditor collaborator. We have to know with our friends, people that we know, and to demystify that Tor is dangerous. My sister told me once that the technician was fixing her computer, and then she asked, have you heard about Tor? And then he said, well, type of web, which is just an encrypted door-to-door document. Let me remind you the famous case back from the 90s when the HTTPS emerged as secure connection, and many people would say that that was extremely dangerous. So you are getting to a safe page. Would you like to go on with that? And today that is a standard, and I doubt that anyone would get into a bank without HTTPS. I hope that the same applies in the future when someone will look and say, well, you are searching the internet without using Tor. The use of Tor helps to demystify that image. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to debate and share different understanding and to add to all this discussion panel. For those of you that may not know about some of the initiatives of the public power and what has been done, we have a common concept, a common governmental concept, which is the government is always ineffective, inefficient, and delayed. So it's important that we learn about some of the initiatives and that has helping to improve public services that we provide to the population. And that's important to explore so we can have a concept and opinion about that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that event. Congratulations. Thank you for the invitation. If you are interested into the topic, get into the tcc.labs. If you have comments, suggestions, critics, just get to us. We'd love to hear your opinion. Two practical examples. Regulatory aspects, going back to the question which was addressed to me. In the binary issue, we say what is prohibited, what is authorized according to law. And we, from legal sector, we have this type of reasoning. But the thing is, extract examples from the environment and how to stimulate those behaviors. BNDES, the Inter-American Bank, financing Internet of Things under a very low interest rate. And in order to get this type of finance, privacy by design is one of the issues. What's the risk of your business? You have a report, and I'm doing that to mitigate. You have a huge change. And government as one of the main technology consumers, private partnerships. When you prioritize the use of friendly private technologies, and they can show that throughout impact reports, and how can the government set up that market. And we open that mentality to stimulate this type of behavior. So we are not reinventing the wheel, but we can look backwards and prospect how we can take that to personal data environment. That's it, everyone. Thank you so much to all debaters. Great reflections, and thank you for your presence and attendance. Goodbye.
Esse é o último painel, então acho que a gente pode já declarar.
So as this is the last panel, this seminar is officially closed. I would like to acknowledge everyone who put this seminar together, Adriana, Carolina, Everton. I cannot mention everything. The guys from the technical streaming, a scientific organizing committee who collectively decides about the topics, panels. We have advisors as Flávia, Luiz, Eduardo Paraggio, and so on and so forth, consultants as Donilo, Carlos Afonso, and the whole NIC.br team. We are very happy with this 9th edition, promoting that collectively. And from now on, it will be very good to carry out the 10th edition, being able to mention the number of that bill. We have been debating and discussing for the past 9 years to bring together that final text, and hopefully we'll be able to consolidate the discussions, and your participations will be essential to keep on developing and evolving. Thank you so much for your time and participation, and see you next year.